Well, I'd now like to introduce our first guest speaker, Millie Anthony from Tipping Point. If you read our newsletter from 2 weeks ago, you'll have seen that Tipping Point is a project of Friends of the Earth. Its aim is to support grassroots movements that are working to impede the coal and gas industries in Australia. So the main movements it's supported over the past years are Stop Adani, Move Beyond Coal, which is the successor to Stop Adani, and School Strike for Climate. Millie's been an organiser and campaigner with the climate justice movement for the past 7 years. She previously worked primarily with young people at the Australian Youth Climate Coalition, working to build youth-led grassroots power. She's also worked as part of the Stop Adani Alliance in Queensland. She's recently been in the UK working with Greenpeace and learning from the UK climate movement. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Millie. If you have any questions for her, can you please put them in the chat? We'll try to get to as many of them as we can.
Great. Thank you so much for that introduction. Gosh, I'm not sure anyone's ever read my bio on the Tipping Point website. Great. And I'm sorry I'm not Josh, but I do work closely with Josh on the campaign side of things at Tipping Point, supporting the Move Beyond Coal movement. So really happy to be here and keen to go through the things that we're up to and what we have been up to for the last few months. Can I just check, have I got
your co-host
15 minutes?
You've
and
got
I
15
can
minutes,
share my screen.
And you co-host it if you want to put something up on the screen.
I would love to put something up on my screen, so I will do that now. Thank you. So yeah, as I said, I'm Millie. I'm on Awabakal land up in Mullumbimba or Newcastle, so just want to acknowledge country up here. And I share my screen now. Great. So we launched the Move Beyond Coal movement last September, and it, as was said, it was the evolution of the Stop Adani campaign, and we have an even bigger mission than the Stop Adani campaign. We're really excited and feel the need to tackle coal mining and exports in Australia. And so our mission overall is to phase out coal mining and exports by 2030 in line with what our Pacific neighbours are telling us is needed, along with all of the scientists. So I know that you know this. And the way that we're planning to do this and that we are doing this is building a bold, diverse climate justice movement in order to drive that change. I can't see what I'm talking about, so I'm going to skip the notes for the moment, the slides for the moment, unless anyone else would be keen to share my slides for me. That would be useful. Perhaps
I can do that for you, Millie.
Great, thank you. They're just in the.
How do I? Oh, you've got them put up there
in the chat. Yeah, great.
Well, I'll see how.
Thank you. So great. So yeah, together we want to solve the biggest contribution Australia makes to the climate crisis, which is coal. But we're doing it in a way that is centering justice as well. So we are recognizing that we're all impacted by climate change, but particularly those on the front lines who have been resisting for, since colonization.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Millie, but it's requesting that I don't have permission to do this.
Oh man, I'm so sorry. This is we should have been able to prep this beforehand.
I can do it if you'd like. I can see the doc.
Oh, that'd be brilliant. Yep. You've got your co-host as well, so.
Thanks, Manjot. I'll just plow on. You can bring up the slides. Oh, sweet. Thank you. So yeah, we as a movement are committed to stand up and show up in solidarity with First Nations people who are leading fights to protect country and demanding the right to determine what's happening on their land. So that is a big part of our goals and our mission as Move Beyond Coal. And that is why we launched the Move Beyond Coal movement. And we are, as a movement, tackling three kind of key pillars. We are headed towards tackling the politics around climate. And we know that that's a key pillar that we need to address in order to stop exports by 2030. At the moment, we are targeting a pillar around finance to stop the money that is allowing for coal companies to expand their projects. And we're also working on the narrative around coal and to drive a change in public opinion in order to quicken the demise of the coal industry and to the phase out in a just way of the coal industry itself. So we're doing, that's a little bit about us, but the reason that we are focusing in on finance at the moment, and particularly on coal exports, is that, as you probably know, Australia has more proposed new coal mining projects for export in the pipeline than anywhere else on the planet. And coal exports are Australia's largest contribution to climate change. And at the moment, there are 69 new coal projects across New South Wales and Queensland that are in the pipeline. Which is quite terrifying. Of those 69, we know that 27 new current projects are on Tanya Plibersek's desk for her consideration. And we also know that coal companies at the moment are completely flush with cash as a result of the invasion of Ukraine. And so those two things in concert are why we are working on the finance, because the particular projects that we are zooming in on already have their approvals. So we are focusing in at the moment on Whitehaven Coal, which is Australia's largest coal-only corporation, and they are planning to double their coal output by 2030, which is just madness given where we're at in the world, but also completely sits at odds with our mission to make sure that coal exports are phased out by 2030. And as I said, they already have their approvals in place. So the projects that we are, these new and expanded projects that Whitehaven are pushing on are Narrabri, Vickery, and Winchester. So as you can see from that slide, and actually, sorry, Gorman North as well, which is a new proposed project that they are working on. But as you can see, the distribution of emissions for the new projects, which are the ones in orange and yellow, are enormous. That's why it's the doubling of emissions based on what they currently have, their existing coal mines. And this year particularly is a critical year for Whitehaven because a lot of the funding deadlines around the debt that they need from Australian banks in order to move ahead with the expansion of these projects is coming to fruition this year. And so our role is in creating uncertainty around these projects by trying to remove the finance that is readily available to Whitehaven in order to push ahead with these projects. So that leads us to our target, which is NAB, or National Australia Bank. So they are the centre of our first campaign because in February of 2020, they loaned Whitehaven Coal $110 million. And what's more, between 2016 and 2020, NAB loaned $9.5 billion to fossil fuels. And all that while they also claim in every possible moment throughout media, on their website, at every opportunity that they are aligned with the Paris Agreement, which is extremely galling. And so we would like to, and we are pushing to call out their greenwash and to ensure that they cannot continue to loan these large amounts of money to coal companies that are expanding coal, whilst also claiming to be aligned with the Paris Agreement. So we want to end the finance that they are giving to new coal. So our demands on NAB is that we want them to immediately end all forms of finance for companies or projects that are expanding the coal industry, but we want them to start with Whitehaven Coal, and that to not renew the $110 million worth of debt that they financed for Whitehaven in 2020. And then we're also calling on them to end all forms of finance for coal, oil, and gas by 2030. So we are saying to NAB, please stop funding coal. Let's start with Whitehaven. And so our movement, and I know that many of you have been part of this, have over the past few months led hundreds of actions and had thousands of conversations with staff, as well as directly confronting NAB's top decision makers at their AGM, at banking summits, all around the place. And we are pushing them to make this decision. And the reason that we are doing all of this, in addition to just trying to stop Whitehaven expanding these particular coal mines, is because we also want to set a precedent. So if we can expose the NAB and make sure that they're not refinancing this particular loan to Whitehaven Coal, we would be pushing on them to change their policy around corporate versus project finance. And if we can get them to close that particular loophole, which I'll get into in a second, we will send a huge message to the rest of the Australian banking sector that they can no longer continue to finance new coal through this corporate finance loophole. And that will have impacts for lots of coal projects across Australia. So yeah, that is our aim over the next few months, is to stand in solidarity with the people and communities like the Gomeroi folk who are fighting these projects of Whitehaven Coal on their land, to stop the funding for these projects and to change NAB's lending policy. So how we plan to do this, which is the really exciting part, is we're going to just like ratchet up the pressure of the last few months. And we want to change the risk calculation for NAB. So at the moment, they think that the benefit of continuing to bank Whitehaven Coal outweighs the risk of stopping that stream of funding for Whitehaven Coal, and we want to shift that risk calculation. And so we want to do that by focusing on three key pillars of NAB. So the first one is their brand. The second one is their staff, but really zooming in on their executive staff. And the third one is their branch operations. So we want to focus on their brand because they have this, as I said, this really green, progressive marketing that they've done in order to shift their focus, their more than money branding. And they've literally spent millions and millions of dollars on this. And they align themselves with progressive causes. And so we think that they are particularly susceptible to a campaign that really highlights this difference between the way that they'd like to have public perceive them and then their ongoing finance for new coal. And we want to zoom in on staff as well, so existing staff and executive, but also new recruits for their potential staff, because we know that in previous campaigns, focusing in on staff and highlighting dissatisfaction and emphasizing the fact that staff are normal Australians who are concerned about climate change and would like to see the company that they work for do something good to prevent it. We know that has been a really key way to change banks' policies in the past. And we want to focus in on their branch operations because we know that continuing to engage with them politely is important, but sustained action at branches will create ongoing disruption and make sure that there is a decision dilemma for them. How much do they want to continue with business as usual, not making a decision around Whitehaven Coal, but have disruption, or make a decision to end that relationship? So we are doing focusing on these three pillars for the next few months, and making sure that NAB executive and decision makers are the key to all of that. So there are a few key ways that you all could take action if you would like to continue to be part of the Move Beyond Coal campaign and movement. So there are a few things that we are encouraging over the next few months that align with those pillars. So actually, we'll come back to this slide in a second. But the first one is that we are pushing on NAB for a big 10 days of action. And that is from March 27 to April 5. And the reason we're pushing at that time is that it aligns with the start of the NAB-sponsored AFL season. Also, the Australian Financial Review's Banking Summit in Sydney, and a fun April Fool's Day in the middle. And so we, across those 10 days, are really keen to take action on all three of these pillars. So the first one, we want to zoom in on the branch operations. So what this could look like during the 10 days of action is going to your branch and letting them know that there is something creative being planned at the branch. And a few Brisbane teams did this at the end of last year, and they let the branch know that they would be there taking action. In Brisbane, they did a queue-in or a sit-in, but for every different group that will look different, depending on what people are comfortable with. But letting the branch know is really key. And then doing a creative action at your local branch. So collectively, we're aiming for 100 actions across the 10 days of action. And we want a number of them to be bold and creative and really exciting. So the 10 days of action could look like letting them know and then doing a creative action at the branch. So that's the branch operation pillar. The second one is the brand. So during those 10 days of action, which also align with the start of the AFL season, we want to lean into NAB's sponsorship of Auskick and the AFL and make sure that everybody who follows the AFL are aware of this choice for NAB to either continue funding Whitehaven or end the relationship. And so we have posters and really fun stickers and really amazing collateral that groups can buy or receive and put them up around branches and around AFL stadiums. I'm sure there are some near you all. In fact, Homebush is probably in Reid just. So yeah, there's lots of opportunities there to really make sure that NAB is being targeted around their brand during those 10 days of action. And then finally, the second pillar, the staff, the executive, we have this amazing tool which we can share with you all that makes it really easy for everybody to contact NAB's 21 board members and executive over email and LinkedIn. And so we want to appeal to them specifically and give them the personal choice to end the relationship. So yeah, there's those three kind of key things that we're really keen for as many groups as possible to help put that pressure on NAB during those 10 days of action and beyond, if you would like. So if you could go to the next slide, Manjot, these are just some of the key things that could happen over the next few weeks and beyond, as you would like. But that was a really quick overview of everything. So I don't want to take up any more time, but I am really keen to stick around and answer any questions that you may have.
Well, that was fantastic, Millie. That was really good. Now, here's what the plan is. We'll listen to Manjot next, then we'll take the questions, then we'll stop recording so that our discussion doesn't go up on the YouTube channel. And then we'll have some discussion about what we may or may not be able to do, because I've come up with a couple of ideas just during the process of listening to you. So I'll now introduce our second speaker, Manjot Kaur. Manjot was a leader of the first school strike for climate in Sydney, organising the biggest climate protests in Australia's history. So Manjot, the floor is all yours.
Thanks so much, Ken. Good afternoon, everyone. It is really lovely to be here. I recognize a few faces from some Move Beyond Coal events, which is really lovely. I know that some of you have been to the launch party, to our foundations workshop, and to a few actions that we've done in front of the HQ. So yeah, I'm really grateful to have another opportunity to chat to you all about this really exciting movement. Although Millie has already given you the best and biggest spiel on Move Beyond Coal and has really laid out our brilliant plan to tackle NAB. And what I'm actually here to do is to give you a little side update on the Stop Adani movement. And the reason I'm doing this is because I think the Stop Adani movement has formed and shaped a lot of the tactics that we're taking into Move Beyond Coal. And I know that a lot of people who care about Move Beyond Coal have also been a big part of the Stop Adani movement. And there's been a lot of big news happening there recently. Firstly, can I maybe just get a show of hands if you've heard of Adani or worked on the Stop Adani movement, so I can get a field of interest? Yeah, that's what I thought. So I don't know if anyone's been noticing what's happening in the news with Adani. I see some nods. Can anyone tell me how many billions of dollars Adani has lost in the last 3 weeks? Type it into the chat or come off mute. It's a lot of dollars, by the way. Oh, that is a beautiful number, but actually, Adani has lost not just $49 billion. Adani has lost the equivalent of 190 billion Australian dollars in the last few weeks. Now, that is half of the market value of the entire Adani empire that has just vanished in the last few weeks. This is massive news. Financial experts haven't seen a company fall quite so rapidly and quite so badly in some time. And the reason this happened is because a report called the Hindenburg Report was released. Now, this report accused Adani of massive amounts of alleged fraud, market manipulation, stock manipulation, accounting fraud, and money laundering through a web of Adani companies, including several Australian Adani companies that are connected to the Adani Carmichael mine in North Queensland. This has been called the largest corporate con in history, and it means a lot of exciting things have been happening in terms of what this means for Adani's coal empire. Firstly, this is the biggest crisis Adani has ever faced, and they're now dealing with challenges of multiple investigations from federal regulators in the UK, Australia, and India. They're dealing with multiple of their biggest and most trusted investors starting to pull back from the Adani empire. They've been asking for repayments of loans before they were due. They've been lowering their exposure to the company. Now, these are some of the world's biggest banks and financiers who are stepping away from Adani. And at the same time, that means they're stepping away and taking the money that Adani can use to continue new plans and projects with them. What this means for Adani is that they're currently finding it really, really hard to access any more capital, to take on any new projects, or to expand existing projects. And it also means it could get very, very, very hard for them to pay off their current debt. This is one of the biggest opportunities globally that the climate movement has had to shift the finance out of Adani and demand that investors don't keep backing Adani. Now we can demand this because not only do investors not want to be involved with Adani because of Adani's terrible ethical and climate track record, but Adani is now a massive corporate scandal as well, so untrustworthy on many levels. And I just want to lay out a few of the different things that could happen next for Adani to answer some of the questions you might have going through your mind when you're seeing all of this financial news. Because it's one thing to hear that Adani has lost billions of dollars. That feels like a win. But the first question that comes to my mind is, well, what does that mean for Adani's coal projects? What does that mean for Carmichael? What does that mean in the real world? I know what it means for the stock market. And what it means for Adani in the real world is that right now, Adani does not have the capital to do anything imminently with their proposed coal projects that are proposed across India and across the world. This is fantastic news because Adani is currently the world's biggest private developer of coal. And what this means for the Carmichael mine in North Queensland is that if Adani keep losing money, if investors keep pulling out, and if we keep this story in the news, in the media, and at the forefront of investors' minds, it means that Adani might not be able to, it looks pretty likely that Adani won't be able to scale the Carmichael mine. So when we first heard about Adani's Carmichael mine in Queensland, it was going to be proposed and planned as the biggest coal mine that Australia had seen. Right now, it's Adani's Carmichael mine is Australia's smallest coal mine. It's only producing 3 million tonnes of coal a year. Adani has been planning to expand that to 30 million tonnes of coal, but right now they don't have the money to go through with that because they're dealing with this crisis. So this crisis right now is having a limiting effect on Adani's mine, and it could even mean down the road that Adani might be forced to sell some of their assets. These assets could be their ports, their airports, their mining projects. And we also know that the Bangladeshi government is requesting a revision on their contract with Adani to actually use the power that's coming from the Carmichael coal. So that raises a lot of questions about what's going to happen with that coal. In terms of what this means for the climate movement in Australia, I think it means that there's a lot more opportunities to keep pushing Adani and keeping them on the forefront of the news cycle and of our conversations. But I think most importantly, it means that we have a lot to be proud of right now as a movement. Because of all the work that different climate groups and individuals have done over the past 8 years, we have kept Adani's mine incredibly small to 3 million tonnes. And we have been continuously putting the pressure on a lot of these investors and financiers who have now pulled out for years on end to make sure that Adani's name has been completely tarnished. And at the moment, there's a lot of different campaigns happening across the globe to target Adani. This looks like a massive campaign in the US. On the Teachers Investment Fund. It also looks like Coal Action UK taking action against Barclays, which is one of Britain's biggest banks who's supporting Adani. And in Australia and in Sydney, the Stop Adani movement has also done an action in front of BlackRock and Barclays and HSBC, putting pressure on them to step away from Adani. And in the future, there might be more opportunities to stand in solidarity with all the work that's happening overseas. I also know that next week, there is a massive protest planned across multiple cities in India at the State Bank of India and other financial bodies that have been funding Adani using public money. And it looks like the best thing we can do is keep fueling the fire, supporting all the different groups who are taking on all of these different targets, and just enjoy watching the Adani empire fall as we continue to put that pressure on. And that's the update from me on Adani, and happy to take any questions on what's happening.
Well, thank you very much, Manjot. That was great. So now we've got question time. Now, I don't know about other people, but I've got a whole bunch of questions. But I'll ask others if anybody has any questions. Just put the hand sign up so that we can see you. Or just call out, because I can't see everybody here. My screen doesn't. Has anybody got any questions there, or shall I ask one of mine? Okay, well, in that case, I shall start. Now, I'm going to presume that all of these coal projects that are on the drawing board are for export, are they not? Manjot or Millie?
Yeah, I can jump in with that one. Yeah, so all of most of the projects that are being are like set on Tanya Plibersek's desk for approval are definitely for export. All of Whitehaven's are for export, and they would go via rail to Newcastle straight out for export. So yes, they are all headed in that direction and are just like fueling climate emissions overseas.
Well, look, I'm the main spokesperson for this group, and I go around giving talks in various places. And I'll give you the two arguments that I usually get when we come to the issue of exports. And I'd just like to see how you respond to these 2 points. People say to me, well, under the Paris Climate Agreement, our exports are not Australia's responsibility. They're the responsibility of whoever buys the coal. We're only responsible for the fugitive emissions arising from the production of those exports. That's argument one that people put. And argument two is that if we don't sell the coal, somebody else is going to, so why should we forego the money that we can get? So how do you respond to those two points? Manjot,
do you want to? I feel like you've got lots of.
Millie, I think you should answer that question, but
okay. Well, I think, it's a real cop-out to say that we're not responsible for those emissions, no matter where the coal is burnt. We are all impacted by the emissions that are put into the atmosphere, and Australia definitely are hugely impacted, but also, morally, no matter where those emissions are burnt, the impacts are usually felt by the people who have done least to contribute to the problem and who are least equipped to manage the impacts. And so, yes, I think morally and economically, we are responsible for those emissions, and certainly will feel the impacts. And in terms of other people selling the coal, that is purely a drug dealer's defense, that, no matter where it will be sold, it'll still be sold anyway. Australia has an opportunity right now to transition away from coal in a way that is actually that we are in control of. But if we leave the transition any longer, we won't be in control of it. The economic markets internationally will be in control as countries decide to buy less as they're transitioning to renewables. And the more that we can be in control, the more we can plan for the communities that have been providing energy for us and providing the energy for export, and we can transition Australia's domestic energy as well. And that is a infinitely better position to be in than to just let the world markets dictate when and if they will take our coal.
That's the same argument I use, the drug dealer's defense. In fact, you both make that argument. The drug dealer says, look, it's the responsibility of whoever buys my product, not me, that's the problem. So don't put me in jail, put the users in jail. And my next door neighbor will sell if I don't sell. But there's also the economic argument that if we stop selling coal, then there's going to be a reduction in the supply, and that's going to put upward pressure on the price of coal and make coal less competitive compared with renewable energy. So it's definitely a positive for us to stop exporting coal. Absolutely. Somebody had a question there. Stephen, were you going to say something?
I think tomorrow.
Tamara? I can't see everybody. That's the problem. They're spread across the top of my screen. Tamara, go ahead.
I was going to ask Manjot, following up on the situation for Adani. I think it's quite well known that one of the reasons for his success in being able to build this enormous empire is that he's extremely well politically connected, and particularly, to the Prime Minister. So I wondered whether there's any thought about taking action in that regard to expose, in a reputational sense, those connections in order to make it undesirable for those politicians to be associated with Adani.
Yeah, when you say undesirable, do you say making it undesirable? Pardon?
In terms of reputation.
Yeah, do you mean like for the Indian politicians to be associated with Adani?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right, Tamara. It is like Adani's entire rise is linked incredibly closely to the political rise of Prime Minister Modi. Back from when, in like 2002, when there were massive riots in Gujarat, which was Modi's like home state, where he was a minister. Adani was the one who came to his rescue and like helped him fight the political backlash by funding him throughout the riots. And for the last, 20 years, Adani and Modi have been incredibly closely linked. And that is one of the reasons Adani's wealth grew so quickly, because of the access to political loopholes, access to like state infrastructure that has, so a lot of India's airports, which used to be state owned, have now been sold to Adani at, a massive loss to like India's public. In terms of if we think exposing that is going to have an impact on the reputation of Indian politicians, I do not see a world in which like Modi and his party step away from Adani. I think it's like they're far too intricately linked. But I think it's really important to highlight the link between the Modi government and Adani, because I think even if it doesn't change what's happening on a political scale in India, on an international level, it definitely helps show that like Adani can't be trusted, and that Adani is connected to all of these dodgy dealings. And yeah, in India, actually, the Adani news is really linked to Modi. A lot of after the report came out, there were massive protests across India calling for Modi to say something about it, but also calling for India's like different state financial firms, like the state bank, like the pension fund, to all divest from Adani. And the reason they'd all invested in Adani in the first place was because of this political relationship. I don't think there's a world in which like Modi and his party are going to completely abandon Adani unless extreme ruin falls upon Adani. But I do think the more we expose it, it definitely helps expose what Adani's doing on an international scale and makes, his reputation much worse. And I also think it's something that the opposition party in India is using as a tool to help create backlash against Adani in like the wider population and to stir a lot of these protests. So I think it's really important to talk about, but I don't think that exposing it is going to make Modi move away for Adani. And I mean, I also think a really interesting question is what happens if Modi doesn't get elected at the next federal election? And I think there's very easily a world in which Modi not being elected means that Adani falls even more because he won't have access to the same political benefits as he normally does. Hope that answered.
Actually, could I just ask one flow-on question? I mean, as we know, the fossil fuel people don't only cultivate one side of politics, they cultivate the others as well. They provide finance. And I don't know well enough about Indian politics, but is that the case in India as well? Is Adani, does he have support from the opposition as well as from the ruling party?
I think that's a really good question. I think when you compare in terms of support that Adani has from the opposition, he might have some of the same kind of like leverage that any company can get from donating to a political party. But he has like nothing like the type of relationship that he has from Modi. And in fact, the opposition, a lot of opposition leaders have actually spent the last few weeks really calling Adani out and calling Modi out and condemning Adani and publicly asking the government to stop funding Adani. So we've actually got a situation happening where one side of politics is openly and vocally anti-Adani and anti-corruption, which is very different from, I think, what you have in Australia, where you don't have one party that's completely against every mining company.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I've got a question here from James. How do we combat the argument that our economy will collapse if we end coal exports? Millie, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would answer it in the same way as earlier, in that, you know, the international market, the seaborne thermal coal market is in terminal decline and will end at some point. And so Australia is in the unique position where we can control that transition, and we need to have a transition. That point is clear because, you know, countries will not continue to import our coal, and therefore being in control of that transition actually opens opportunities for us to take advantage of the fact that we can create abundant energy through renewable energy that would allow for other significant economic opportunities to open up, and that is the future, and we need to be focusing on that rather than on how to expand the length of time that the export market for thermal coal will continue, because the rest of the world is just moving on from that.
We've got a question here from Rick. Sorry, I didn't spot it before. He says, what is the relationship of Bravis to Adani? He says, as an NRL fan, I understand Bravis is a major sponsor of the North Queensland Cowboys.
Yeah, I can take that quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So Bravis used to be called Adani Australia. They renamed themselves as Bravis because of the massive reputational damage that the climate movement created. I couldn't tell you exactly how they're linked because the Adani Group is made up of like 7 major companies, but then a lot of smaller subsidiary companies. But Bravis Adani Mining is the Australian arm of Adani Enterprises that runs the Carmichael Coal Project in Australia.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, look, what I think we'll do is finish up with the recording here, because then we can have some brief discussion about what we can do, which is, I think, what we're really here for. So thanks very much to Millie and Manjot for your presentations. They were absolutely fantastic.